Okay, so let's talk about diagnosis. How is it diagnosed? TSH, we talked about that before, thyroid stimulating hormone. Where is it from? The pituitary, right? Pituitary will ask the thyroid to make it. So the typical lab range, now the lab ranges are going to vary. I could go on a whole tangent about lab ranges for the next 30 minutes and I'll spare you that, okay? But just suffice it to know that most of the lab ranges that you're going to get, that the blood work you'll get from Quest or LabCorp or wherever you're getting it from, most of those, not all, but most of those ranges are from a bell curve. And what they're going to do is take the 95th percentile of people and call them normal, and 2.5% on the high side and 2.5% on the low side are now abnormal. Does that make sense? So you can, and these will vary from region to region. So you can be hypothyroid on the East Coast and not be hypothyroid on the West Coast. A little crazy, right? Yeah, it's nuts.
I just have a quick question. I had lab results and it says on there TSH and then it has third generation.
Yeah, well that's the one that they test. There's, we're going to simplify everything. When we talk about T3 and T4, there's also T1, 2, there's more. But we're just going to really keep it basic for what we're talking about. But that's the one that they're going to test, third generation TSH. So that's how the lab ranges are determined. So 0.5 to 4.5 or 5 or 5.5, it is coming down. This top range is coming down. And the reason why is because all the people that are going to get tested over and over and over again that are on thyroid hormone, many people are on too much thyroid hormone, so it makes that TSH like 0.01 or 0.0, whatever, really, really low, and they keep being tested, and that affects that bell curve, and it keeps getting smaller. Does that make sense?
Mine was 0.004.
Yeah, that's the hyperthyroid. Yep. So the functional medicine lab range, we deal with things that are based more on ideal conditions. I like to call them optimal ranges instead of normal ranges, okay? Because normal is the rest of the population. Who goes to get blood work? Sick people, right? Yeah. I don't want to be normal. I don't want to be like that, right? So I want to hold myself to a higher standard, and that standard is with tighter lab ranges. So many people come in and they say, oh, my blood work, my labs, I don't want to bring them in because they're all normal. It don't even do you any good. But that person, they'll come in and I'll mark up, they'll have some red and yellow highlighter all over the place because, it's harder to pass my test than it would be to pass your typical lab range test. Make sense? Okay. By the way, this is also the number from the Endocrine Society. So the Endocrine Society says it should be 1.8 to 3.0. Okay, but there's no consensus. Right? So and that's my 30 minutes all wrapped up in 4. Okay? All right, so that's how it's diagnosed. So if your TSH is above 4.5 or 5 or 5.5, they're going to call you hypothyroid, okay? If it's below this, 1.8, like the gentleman back here, they're going to call you hyperthyroid. Now, many times you have to test it a few different times to make sure that we are hyperthyroid, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. So that's how it's diagnosed. So the most important question that we ask in my office and in functional medicine is why? The 3-letter word that my little kids love to ask all the time. So your TSH is high. Well, why? Wouldn't that be a good question to ask? Instead of, oh, your TSH is high, here's some thyroid hormone. Not really the best way to do it. So we ask why, and we look at the reasons why that might be so. Same thing with diabetics. Why are we having this issue? Let's fix the issue if we can. Now, there are some limitations of matter. Not everything can be fixed. We go too far down the road, and there's no turning back, and you have to go ahead and get those other major things. But we're going to ask why. So maybe it's not the thyroid's fault. There's a lot of different reasons why we're having possibly issues with hypothyroidism and even hyperthyroidism. So we're going to take this example. I love to use examples like this. And the example is about a light bulb. Okay, see that light bulb at the bottom left? That light bulb, imagine that light bulb is not working perfectly. All right, it flickers sometimes. Sometimes it's dim. It's just not working great. Okay? Well, the cause of that flickering could be the light bulb itself, right? What else could it be? Could be the switch, right? Or the transformer, or the power grid, or whatever this thing is, right? Could be all those different spots. So let's say that this light bulb flickering is, let's say that it is the this thing here. Let's say it's the switch, so I know what it is, right? Let's say it's a switch.
That's a circuit breaker.
The circuit breaker. Oh, let's say it's. Thank you, sir. Let's say it's the circuit breaker, right? Because now I know what that is. So it's a circuit breaker. So what happens if we change the light bulb? What's going to happen?
Be brighter. It'll still be brighter.
It'll be maybe be brighter, but really the answer I'm looking for is going to the same thing, right? So what happens if we change the light bulb 1,000 times?
Nothing.
Same thing, right? Because it's really not the light bulb's fault. It's the circuit breaker's fault. So with that said, yes, help me to get through this one. With that said, let's imagine that this light bulb here is actually your thyroid, okay? And it's not working very well. Sometimes it works okay, and sometimes it doesn't really work very well, and you're having some symptoms, okay? Now, let's say that it is caused by a problem that TSH, that thyroid hormone won't help. Right? Let's say it's caused by one of the other 7 ways that we're having issues. And there are 7, by the way, 7 different issues of thyroid dysfunction. If you have one that isn't affected by thyroid hormone, what happens if you take the thyroid hormone? What's going to happen to the thyroid? You're still going to have the same symptoms, right? Your symptoms will be the same. So, if you take that thyroid 1,000 times, so you keep raising the thyroid hormone, it's not going to make a difference in you. So that's why some people can have perfectly normal lab ranges, and they're on thyroid hormone, and they're still having the symptoms. And the reason is because the thyroid hormone isn't getting into the cell. Make sense? Okay, good. Okay, first cause is pituitary hypofunction. You guys remember the pituitary we were just talking about before, right? So there's a lot of reasons why that might occur, why we might have hypofunction. A lot of stress. Anybody here have stress in their life? Yeah? Everybody's raised. Post-pregnancy and inappropriate use of thyroid medication. Okay, so if we have way too much thyroid hormone that we're taking, eventually the pituitary gland gets the message that, hey, I'm not needed anymore. We don't need to secrete that TSH anymore because we're good. We have plenty of it that's out there. Same thing for other hormones too, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. If you're taking exogenous hormones, eventually your body gets the message that we don't need to create that hormone anymore, and it will just many times have that feedback loop lost for good. Actually, that's what this says down here. I'm going to read it to you. With an overabundance of thyroid hormone circulating in the bloodstream, the pituitary gets the message it's no longer needed and eventually stops communicating with the thyroid gland. Sometimes this is permanent, and dependence upon medication is lifelong. Okay? So that's an issue. Any hormone that there's too much in there creates issues like this. Second cause is thyroid underconversion. Remember before we talked about the conversion process from here? Okay? Well, we have a liver, right? The liver has to convert 60% of it. What happens if we have liver issues? Is it possible we might not convert the thyroid hormone as well? Oh yeah. Yeah. How about in the GI system? If you have GI complaints, even if you don't have GI complaints, if you don't have the right bacterial flora in your gut, you're not going to possibly be able to convert thyroid hormone as well as you could be from T4 to T3. Make sense? Okay, so excess cortisol, does anybody know what that's caused from? Stress, yeah, stress is a big one. We also talk about cortisol with, you probably heard it on TV, cortisol and belly fat. Belly fat that won't go away? Yeah, that's a big one. Inflammation is a really big one. If you have inflammation in your body, it's an unhealthy event. It causes a big cascade of issues throughout the body. And inflammation is caused by a lot of different things. And it all depends on you and your own physiology and your own sensitivities. We'll talk about that in a minute. Infection's another one that can cause underconversion. Okay? So the important thing about this that I want you to know is that the TSH will be normal, so it's not converting enough thyroid hormone to T3. Okay, remember we need T3, but it's not converting enough of it. But the TSH will still look normal because there's plenty of T4. The T4, there's plenty of it, but there's not enough T3. Nod your heads if you understand what I'm talking about. You do? Okay, good. So this is one of the most dangerous ones where the people come in and they're like, I feel like I got hypothyroidism, but I keep going and getting lab tested, and they keep telling me that there's nothing they can do because I'm fine. Take some Prozac, right? So not enough T4 is converted to T3.
So what exactly is the bulletin board good for then? What's it checking is what my question is. Is it checking for the T4? Is it checking
for
the T3?
It is. Yeah. Mainly.
They don't know. Why can't they figure out a way to...
Some of them do test T3, and we'll go into the tests that are necessary. But for the most part, it's really only TSH and maybe total T4 that they may test. Typically. Okay. But they can test for the other ones as well. Okay. Decreased thyroid binding globulin. So what this is, I want you to think about binding globulin, kind of like taxi cabs in New York City. I'm from New York. Can you tell?
No.
All right, cool. Well, I live in New Jersey. Don't hold that against me, but I've only been there for 2 years, and I had a practice in New York for 10 years, and my wife is from New Jersey, and happy wife, happy life. So we sold the practice down there, and before my oldest was going into first grade, we moved down to New Jersey, and I got to travel 45 minutes over to Langhorne, where we are right now, because I'm able to do a lot more there than I can in New Jersey. We utilize oxygen therapy and do some other cool stuff that I wouldn't be able to do over there. Okay. Okay. So back to the taxi cab thing. So taxi cabs are the things that kind of shuttle the thyroid hormone. They bind the thyroid hormone to it. And it occurs if there is not enough thyroid binding globulin, there can be overconversion that occurs. Okay, so cells are going to become resistant to the thyroid hormone. So not only do you need to have enough T3 in there, so if we have too little T3, it's a problem. If we have too much T3, it's also a problem. Now, when we have any hormone that is in abundance for a long period of time, the cells put their hands up and resist it. They don't want to have that anymore. It's almost like insulin resistance. I like to use that example. You all know what I'm talking about with insulin resistance, right? So a person who's diabetic, you should have, if you're not diabetic, you should have this much glucose and this much insulin to get the glucose from the blood into the cell. Okay? When you are insulin resistant, or if you're diabetic, many times you'll need this much insulin to get this much glucose into the cell, and eventually the pancreas just poops out because it's been working so hard, and you eventually have to take insulin to get that to happen. But that creates insulin resistance. So any hormone that there is in abundance will cause resistance to thyroid hormone. So one of the reasons for this is elevated levels of testosterone. Not only in men, in women as well. Okay, so if you have too much testosterone, it's going to decrease the thyroid binding globulin, okay, and it's going to cause more free T3. Free T3 is the stuff that we need to get into the cells. But if there's too much free T3 for too long, the cells start resisting. You with me? Okay, again, not my opinion. I didn't make this up. It's in the medical journals, and you could read about it in that book, okay? Insulin resistance, that's the example I gave you before. PCOS, anybody know what that is? Polycystic ovary syndrome. That's a big mimicker to thyroid hormone. And diabetes, that's the reason why I bring the diabetes up is the example I told you about before with the insulin. Okay? So this is